One general instruction for Sunday school teachers, we ask that you keep the Sunday school, the room doors, you're over there in those rooms, keep the doors open, even though it might be a little bit distracting and you may hear noise coming in from other classrooms. One of the reasons for that is we want to maintain a very clear testimony as a church in our interaction as adults and children, because we live in a world where, and we are in flesh that can be easily tempted, and we live in a world where these kinds of accusations are taken very seriously. And even though we want to take our relationships with children, especially others' children, as teachers, we know that this is a sort of environment where it could easily get out of hand or false accusations come out. And so, as a general principle, we ask you teachers to keep the room door open. That way, anybody passing through can overhear what's being said or even see what's going on in our interaction with the children. We must be very careful. We are seeking to follow the Lord. We seek to maintain a pure testimony, not only before the Lord who sees our heart and the purity of our heart, but also before the world that sees our outward actions. And those actions must never be misunderstood, even if our heart is pure. I believe that we have a responsibility to walk in our behavior that's observed by the world and by each other, by people coming in and seeing how we interact with our children, how the Sunday school classes are set up, that there is a high standard. I remember being very challenged by the testimony of Billy Graham as an old man even. He's a man who has maintained a clear testimony in his moral life, in his marriage, in his family life, well into, I think he's in his late 90s now. And the Lord has used him mightily, but he said that from his early days of ministry and well into when he was an old man, he would never be in a room alone with a woman, no matter how young or how old she was, because he wanted to be sure to never put himself into a situation where he could be tempted, first of all, or where somebody could accuse him falsely or spread rumors about him. As you've observed us, this is a standard we maintain. We'll never counsel you women alone, sisters alone. It's a very high standard that we want to maintain just because we know our flesh is weak, and we live in a world where, especially I think in a church like ours where we're trying to grow close in our relationships, we must be very certain that we don't cross boundaries. There are certain boundaries that God has drawn which cannot be crossed even in our church like ours, where we're seeking to be intimate, and that is family boundaries. For example, my marriage with Megan is just between the two of us, and none of you, men or women, is allowed to come into that relationship. I also believe the same is true about the home, that my relationship with my children and the responsibilities and the freedom that I have with my children is something that nobody else is allowed to enter into, because God has drawn that circle or that boundary around us. And so along those lines, I've been praying about how we can give some guidance along that, about us as adults respecting some boundaries when it comes to other people's children. And again, it's not because you were concerned what will happen, that something evil is going to happen, or anybody would, that a predator might come in and take advantage of the freedom that we have. I believe the Lord is here to protect the church, but it's a standard we want to maintain where others observing us see this is a church that respects those boundaries and recognizes that because we're in the flesh and because we live in this world, we want to be extra careful. The verse that comes to mind when I think about areas like this is 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12. Let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. If I think that I'm never going to fall, then I probably will. If I act in pride, or if I think of myself as above that temptation, there's a danger that I probably will fall. And we must recognize that as adults and be careful because of those two things. One is that we're in a flesh that's still tempted, and also because God has drawn those boundaries around us. So as a way of practical guide to us as adults in our interaction with children, we ask that you be careful to respect the boundaries. And what we mean by that is that you avoid physical contact with children who are not yours. That means picking them up, tickling them, horsing around with them. If you wouldn't do it with my wife, don't do it to our children. That's essentially what you're saying. And it can be easy because children love uncles, they love aunts, and they love adults. They love that interaction with them, and we can be easily drawn into a playful relationship with them that's not healthy. And that's where we felt like we'd like to give you some guidance on that. So As a general principle, I'm applying this to myself first of all. I'm not going to pick up any of your children. Now, I understand that some of you may give certain freedoms to other adults because you know them well and because your children have a familiarity with them. So we're not saying that, you can't do it at all, but if you are going to do it, if you do have that, you feel like you have that relationship with a family, maybe it's your own nephew or your own niece, make sure that you're absolutely clear with the parents, and before you pick them up or play with them or do anything or are alone with them, for whatever reason, that the parents are absolutely clear. Ask permission. Maybe even when it comes to babies, before picking up a baby or holding a child, having them sit on your lap, make sure that the parents are absolutely clear and absolutely okay with your doing that. What that will do, and please understand, I want to be certain that that this isn't being conveyed in a spirit of fear or a spirit of anything that's not Christ-like, but just a general guideline of how we can be more Christ-like and more respectful of boundaries that God has drawn, that we see God has drawn. So, yes, that's what I wanted to say also. And as parents, as adults, I want to encourage you, don't be afraid to speak to other adults who you feel are going beyond what you would be comfortable with. Now, I understand that I think in this church there's nobody who has a malicious intent, but you may be uncomfortable with how free somebody is with your own children. And we want you to know, as elders in this church who have the responsibility for the care in the church, that you have the freedom to come up to me if you see me being too free with one of your children. Tell me, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. Please don't do that. And if we can't do that to one another, then we're deceiving ourselves that we're really having unity and fellowship. Fellowship doesn't mean that I never tell you anything that bothers me about you, but neither does it mean that every little thing that annoys me about you, I just blurt out to you. There's a healthy balance there, but that includes that if something you're doing I'm not okay with, in other words, if you're doing something to my child or having a familiarity with them that I think is inappropriate, that only I as the father or my wife as the mother should have, then I should have the freedom to come to you as my brother, as my sister, and say, hey, let's not do that. I prefer that you not do that to my children. You all have that freedom with each other, and if you're one whom they come to and ask that off, please take it the right way. Please understand that this isn't about that we have it against you or this or that. And you may find that there are others that a parent is more comfortable with allowing their children to have that freedom with. It's okay. And it's not an indication that somebody's worse or somebody's better. Certain families may be more comfortable with others. In general, if you're not sure, avoid it. Set the bar very high. So parents, you must feel completely free to talk to other adults about how they interact with your children especially. And teach your children also to say, hey, I'm not allowed to do that. We've been telling our children as well that if somebody picks them up or somebody interacts with them or has especially physical contact or speaks to them in a way that's inappropriate, that they must recognize that and say, hey, it's not okay. My parents, daddy and mommy have told me that you're not allowed to do that to me, or I don't want you to do that to me. And if it doesn't end there, then we told them to come to talk to us. Now, for those of you that send your children to schools, I hope you do that as well, because we do live in a world where there's sin. It's just a factor of the world we live in. Even though I believe the Lord will protect us, and we don't have to be fearful about what will happen to our children. This is a place of safety. This is an environment that we want to ensure will always be safe for our children. I believe it always will be. I think that part of the responsibility God gives us and the call and the direction that we hear as sheep, hearing from the shepherd and passing on to you as under shepherds in this church, is that we be respectful and that we think about these things in these practical ways. So train your children to be bold similarly with others. Explain to them very clearly what's okay and what's not, essentially is what I meant to say. We want you to know that that's our desire is for our children to know, yes, out there may be things that could happen to you, but there's a safety in this church, and we recognize that when we have that freedom and that safety, that we're ensuring that a predator or that spirit that's too familiar or inappropriate or not glorifying to God has no room. Amen.